Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dyken, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. The next entry in the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds interview series is from Chuck's chat with reissue genius Bob Irwin. Bob and his wife Mary started the Sundazed music label in 1989. The first Sundazed releases were the Great Lost Knickerbockers Album by the Knickerbockers and Western Union by the Five Americans, and reflected Irwin's personal preference for garage rock and surf music. His skill at restoring old vinyl records for the then-new CD format attracted the attention of major labels, who increasingly solicited him to help them reissue material from their back catalogs. He also helped Sony Music release their archival Legacy Records label. Later, his restoration work included early material by the likes of Bob Dylan, Nancy Sinatra, and the Byrds. In this episode, Bob discusses his relationship with Pet Sounds, its standing in the pantheon no matter how many times you've heard it, its importance and influence on music in general, and the wonders of a technology with inherent imposed limitations. Here it is then, Bob Irwin.
My first exposure to the record was at this neighbor's house, and it was one of many Beach Boys records that were played in that house. But, even at that point in time, everyone, regardless of any musical knowledge that they might or might not have had, kind of like felt that record was different. And I never was able to really, I was too young to dissect any of that. I really knew what it meant. I just knew that when I was at this guy's house, that was kind of like one of the Beach Boys records that everybody lunged for and everybody put on. And the compositions on the album to me were songs, and really, really good songs, and of course, subconsciously, I guess I knew that it ran the gamut from things that you could, tap your toe to, like Sloop John B. and stuff like that, to, songs like Caroline No that I really, really loved and sang, but it wasn't the typical kind of song that, I was going home and trying to figure out on a guitar and sing. It was a different musical thing for me.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was, much older and started, really developing my interest in music and all things musical, whether it was, from what I understood a production aspect to be at that point in time. I was young again. I didn't know what that entailed. But again, I knew that album sounded different. And as I got older, the album kind of disappeared from my life for a while. And then, the serious or more serious understanding of what the record was all about developed when I was like, probably a senior in high school. And my girlfriend and I put a lot of time and energy into basically, living and breathing certain recordings or certain albums that we really couldn't afford when we were kids, We'd go out, on a Monday afternoon after school, after I had the money from playing music in a band all weekend, and go record hopping to different stores and department stores up in, the Albany area. And it was in the days of the cutouts, when for 10 or 15 bucks, you'd come home with a hell of an armful of records.
Right.
And that's traceable for me as being probably the true foundation of making me decide what I wanted to do and how I wanted to be involved in the music business. And I don't want to make that sound like I had it all sussed out. I didn't at all. I just knew that, boy, it was a great feeling to, come home with an armful of records with my girlfriend and go through and play these things and, figure out which ones couldn't stop tapping your toe to and which ones were just, romantic records and which ones were fun to listen to. And that's certainly when when Pet Sounds, along with a handful of other records, really took hold, and I really started to understand, or again, I want to say that really clearly, I didn't understand it. I'm not sure that I still do. But that's when I first realized that it was certainly a different album, and there was a lot more to it. Now, I didn't understand the depth, and I didn't understand what constituted the depth, just that there was a lot of depth there, and it was different than any other rock and roll album that I had in my collection. And from there, and again, it's not just that record, but I think that and maybe 3 or 4 albums are the ones that were the true impetus and inspiration for me to decide that there was nothing else I ever wanted to do.
What were those other albums?
Well, again, there are things that, may seem very disparate if I say them to anyone else, but in my mind's eye, they all fit together really well. I'll just preface the whole thing with saying they're all kind of records that, aside from the obvious musicality and, wonderful compositions that were on them, there was a certain depth in the production that I latched onto, and it wasn't clunky, overblown production. It was true musical production. I mean, it was things like Buffalo Springfield Again, where the confluence of the songwriting and the production and just the song structure bowled me over. The Byrds' Younger Than Yesterday album. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a handful of those things that, again, on the outside, I guess maybe they go together better than I'm really painting the picture, but I know how they all came together in my mind's eye and why they were all there. The texture of all the various guitar parts playing into each other on Buffalo Springfield Again, yet not seeming overblown and overdone.
Right.
The perfect chemistry and harmony, coupled with, amazing songs that were being written, and with something like the Byrds' Younger Than Yesterday, that was a more stripped-down production. But again, it was the interplay of the guitars, and the band at that point in time when you had Roger McGuinn's chiming Rickenbacker and David Crosby's amazing rhythm guitar playing, and then, Clarence White's incredible, indescribable lead guitar playing, from another world playing over top of it. And it was that chemistry of those instruments, much the same way. All of the chemistry of the instruments, and more so the voices on Pet Sounds, really just made me realize, as much as I love rootsy, guttural, raw, stripped-down rock and roll, which I do, that this was a whole nother layer, in that it was going to take a hell of a lot longer to dissect and digest this stuff than maybe learning a Trog song on the guitar.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release ad-free super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.